Now, we mentioned 46.5 million people eligible to vote. It's a record. Included in that number are Commonwealth migrants, including people from Canada, part of the Commonwealth, who are now living in the UK, one of whom is my next guest. Brad Nickpon lives in London, England, has been for a couple of years. Today, though, he's back in London, Ontario. Doesn't matter. As long as it's London, that's where you are, Brad, and we get to talk to you, and it's a pleasure to have you on the program today.
Thank you very much, Heather. Good to be on.
Well, is it kind of disappointing for you to be in Canada rather than where you're living now in London, England? What could be a very historic day, and you're missing it in person?
It is a little bit. When they scheduled the referendum, my wife and I had already scheduled our annual summer visit home, and it would have been good to be on the ground, but now I can watch it from abroad, so
unfolding with a little bit of distance. But of course, you've already done your duty. You have voted already. You sent us a picture of your ballot. Let's show that to everyone now. You don't mind keeping your vote a secret. Here is what Brad has decided. You are firmly marked in the Remain camp. Why did you vote that way, Brad?
Well, I think that that both sides have had a chance to make their case over the last few months, and I think that the Leave side has had, has highlighted some shortcomings in the EU. In particular, I think there's a perception on the ground amongst a lot of people that there's a bit of a democratic deficit, that the institutions don't work as well as I think people hope they would. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to an economic issue, and the British economy is very highly integrated these days. It has been for decades with the continental economy. And if Britain were to vote to leave, I think that there would be, and there's been a consensus among world financial organizations, the Bank of England, the OECD, the World Bank. Everybody has said that there will be economic damage to people on the ground if Britain votes to leave. And I think it's important that people recognize that. And I want Britain to be strong. It's my second home at the moment. I'm a Canadian, but I live there. And I think other Canadians would want Britain to be strong as well. And part of that is not suffering the financial damage that is very likely to happen if Britain leaves.
So concerned about the economic consequences, you're quite right. I mean, officials here in Canada, including the finance minister, had been warning of the broad, far-reaching economic implications of the UK voting to leave. So that's been, and all the polls indicate, Brad, that economics and immigration are the two real driving issues here as people decide which way to go. Have you heard that in your discussions with family, well, not family, but with your friend circles and your work associates there? Tell me about the kinds of discussions that you've been having with people as they decide which way to go.
Oh, I definitely have heard both of those issues. I mean, I think that one of the interesting angles that the Leave campaign has taken, which is, I think, until this week when it's starting to show a bit of a shift in the polls, is they really spent the last few months framing this as an issue of nationalism. And when the whole referendum kicked off, I think people viewed it a little bit more stringently in terms of immigration and in terms of economics. And I think that one of the successes that the Leave campaign had over the months was really framing this as an issue of British pride, an issue of Britain's place in the world. And I think that actually detracted a little bit from some of the core issues, of which I mentioned economics, I believe, is the most important. And I think we've seen a bit of a pullback on that because as we approach the actual decision date, people have sat down and started to say, well, how will this affect me on the ground? How will this affect the pound? How will this affect the amount of money I have to buy food for my family and whatnot? So I think that that issue is pulled back a little bit. Definitely immigration, I think, is probably the hottest topic, and Britain's place in allowing EU citizens to enter and work in Britain. I mean, my personal view, and I think this is backed up by the data, is that a lot of that overstates the downside of immigration. I think that Britain has benefited quite greatly by having a lot of skilled trade come in, by having people from other parts of Europe have labor mobility, is able to better service certain sectors of the economy where there was a shortage, certain types of labor. And I think that in the end, even though there's some concern about the level of movement that's happened, that one is a little bit misplaced. And the other one is security.
Yes.
I think a lot of people are somewhat concerned about Britain being able to control its borders. And as you know, if you ever fly into Heathrow from any airport in Europe, the Brits actually do already have the ability to security check everyone as they come in. There's border control. So
we certainly heard that from David Cameron as part of his final argument, saying together we are much more able to keep the UK as a safe country and safe peoples. I love listening to you. You're very, very insightful on the kinds of discussions going on over there. I want to ask you, though, because as I've been following this, it takes me back to the years that I was working in Quebec, right at the time of the Quebec referendum. We have a picture of that, 1995. I don't know, even in terms of how the leaders have responded, almost like, not really paying close attention, then suddenly panic. We were looking at some of them there, Chrétien, Johnson, and Charest there. As a Canadian now following this, do you see any analogies, or does it harken back to Quebec for you from that time?
Yeah, well, it certainly does. I actually had the opportunity in 1995 to attend the Unity rally in Montreal. And one of the things that I remember as being the most inspiring about that was we all have our political preferences and we all have our partisan bents. But that was an issue that the party leaders really came together and said, this is in the best interest of the country. And I saw Jean Chrétien and Jean Charest share a stage together and make that statement to the Canadian people. And I think that one thing that in the British referendum that has been a little bit lacking is that even though all of the major party leaders other than UKIP, have stood up and said this is in the best interest of Great Britain, there's been a little bit of a lack of unity, a little bit of partisan sniping that I think has been damaging the Remain side. I've been following it quite closely, and it's surprising how often, for example, David Cameron or Jeremy Corbyn will get up and start answering questions, and people will suddenly, either in the interviewers, the audience, or other political leaders, start sniping about other smaller government issues or other partisan issues.
So that has affected the debate. Well, we will wait to see and find out in just a matter of hours which side does prevail. But you've certainly helped us understand the issues well from the Canadian perspective, too. Really appreciate it. Brad, good to meet you, and thanks for joining us this morning.